All right, let's try and bring you some analysis as we wait to be addressed, possibly by the Prime Minister in the United Kingdom, Boris Johnson. He's today expected to resign as Tory Party leader. Johnson is believed to have spoken to the party committee and has agreed to stand down. Let's get some analysis now on the developments in Downing Street, and I'm joined by the founding director of the Sir Bernard Crick Centre. This is for public understanding and politics at the University of Sheffield. Matthew Flinders joins us now. Professor, thank you very much for your time. Can I start by asking you whether you believe that indeed the speculation that Boris Johnson is going to resign are in fact true? Is it going to happen given what we saw last night?
Yes, I think the Boris barricade is over, and at this lunchtime we are expecting a statement where he announces his decision to step down from the autumn. So he won't go straight away, but he will accept that his time as Prime Minister is coming to an end, and he will be the interim Prime Minister until a new leader of the Conservative Party is elected.
All right, very interesting thoughts indeed. How would you describe Boris Johnson's time in office? It seems to have limped from one scandal to the next.
Well, if you look at Boris Johnson's whole career, you might argue that he's limped from one scandal to another. He's certainly an interesting and unconventional politician, and actually the first real celebrity politician in British politics. There's probably very few people like him globally. That he honed his reputation by being almost a comedian, a joker, a jester. Even people that didn't like his policies at least thought he was funny, and that actually carried him into office. So the fact that he is going out with such drama and sensationalism doesn't surprise me at all.
Is it ideal for him to remain in an interim position while a new leader is found? And the reason I'm asking you this question is that won't this cause chaos, or you think that he's actually going to resign all his positions?
No, he will, I'm pretty confident, stay as Prime Minister until a successor has been elected, and the new successor won't be in place until the party conference in September. So Boris Johnson will remain as Prime Minister. However, it would be impossible to cause more chaos than has already been created. We have a government with no ministers at the moment, and we're also heading into the summer. So to some extent, Boris Johnson will be a lame duck Prime Minister, though there have been questions about whether he's created so much chaos that whether there should be a caretaker Prime Minister put in. That idea at the moment isn't getting a lot of traction. I think for fear that if it did become a big issue, Boris might decide not to go again.
What do you anticipate this is going to do to the support for his party?
Well, what's very interesting is, to some extent, Boris Johnson never really had the full support of his parliamentary party. He was elected as leader of the Conservatives by the grassroots party, who love his very jovial, buffoonery type style. The great worry for the Conservative Party is that they have lost their traditional commitment to trust, integrity, detailed delivery of government. The benefit for the Conservative Party, however, is simply that by Boris agreeing to go now, they do at least have a couple of years where a new Conservative leader and Prime Minister can try to salvage the reputation and rebuild the Conservatives as a party in office. The flip side is also that although the Labour Party have made great gains in terms of attacking Boris Johnson, they are struggling themselves to offer a clear, coherent agenda for governing. So you would actually think the Labour Party would be far, far ahead in the polls, but they're not.
In an article that you wrote yesterday, Professor, you headlined it like this: Boris Johnson, a terminal case of hubris syndrome. What do you mean by that?
Hubris syndrome is actually well known within the psychological profession. David Owen, who himself was a former politician, a foreign secretary in the UK and a doctor, has written widely on hubris syndrome. This is basically when a politician becomes so isolated in office, but also so self-believing in themselves and grandiose that they start to become foolish, reckless, and succumb to folly. I think if you look at how Boris Johnson has been acting and behaving and what he's been saying in the last couple of weeks, it's almost gone far beyond his normal buoyant, puppyish optimism to almost as if he was becoming disconnected with the reality around him. And it was that reality that his own backbenchers and yesterday even his own cabinet members tried to get him to reconnect with. And it was really hard for them to do so. Hubris syndrome is a very big issue for politicians around the world.
So how could people have missed that behavior then that you describe about Boris Johnson? Do you think that people were clouded by the Brexit period because he pretty much championed that?
I think what's really interesting is I think a lot of people were increasingly aware. There were increasing comments about his bizarre comments and behaviour. What was also really important was that Boris had got to the point where most, how do I put this, serious, established politicians had moved away from him, and Boris was surrounded by a relatively small number of acolytes that would say anything if they thought Boris wanted to hear it. He wasn't being challenged internally in the way that any good, confident Prime Minister or President needs to be. In the end, that allowed him to become disconnected and ultimately to his downfall.
If the statistics I'm about to read to you are correct, Professor, there is a suggestion, someone very bright has done the calculation, and they're saying that Boris Johnson has been in office as Prime Minister for 28 days. That's fewer days than Theresa May. What does that tell us?
Well, Boris Johnson has been Prime Minister for more than 28 days. I think it's nearly 3 years, but it's certainly a lot less than his grand predictions that were made not long ago when he declared he was going to be in power for at least a decade. So Boris Johnson has a distinctive personality. He's well known when he was a very, very, very young child to have declared that he wanted to be world king. He dotes on Churchill, legacy, empire, and he wanted to have a legacy, which inevitably he will have because he led the government through Brexit, then through COVID, and it's right, he's had a succession of crises to deal with. And in some ways, Boris Johnson was an unconventional politician who stepped in at a very unconventional moment in British politics. The problem was that now the country is longing for stability, detail, governing capacity, seriousness, and that is never something that Boris Johnson was going to deliver.
Professor, final question to you. I think you may have alluded to it right at the beginning of our conversation. Who do you anticipate to be the next leader of the United Kingdom? Well,
I mean, it's very interesting how that somewhere, somehow, a gun has gone off and the leadership race has boom. Now there's 7 or 8 people, many people who are not going to make it but are going to use the leadership race just for their own publicity. There are the obvious candidates, Rishi Sunak, Liz Truss, Hunt, Sajid Javid. I am not a betting man, but if I was, I think Nadhim Zahawi, who was the COVID minister, then education minister, and for one day Chancellor of the Exchequer, I think he has an opportunity now, if he wants to really make a run for the top job. And I think he would be popular.
Why? Why do you think, why him?
Because he is generally not affiliated long-term with the Conservative Party. He's seen as a new entrant into senior national level profile politics. He passes the cup of coffee test. People can talk to him. He listens. He connects to people. He's generally seen as a very competent minister when he was COVID lead, when he was when he was education secretary, and I detect that he comes across in a way which is far more engaging, empathetic, emotionally connected than many other members of the Conservative Party at the moment. But now, of course, I've mentioned his name, he's almost guaranteed to fall at the first hurdle.
I wonder why you think that way. Thank you very much for your time and insights here. That's Professor Matthew Flinders, and he is at the University of Sheffield. I must thank you very much for coming on, Professor, at such short notice. We really do appreciate your time.